Hi, I'm Callum from Retro Power. Since 2020 we've been doing a weekly walk around our workshop called the Uncut series, where we show the progress on the various projects we're working on. We thought it would be really cool if we edited together all the segments that relate to each individual project into one series, so you can actually follow the build of an individual project start to finish. So that's what we've done. Welcome to the Dream Car Build series.
Be busy on the Chevette. We've had a few jobs that we're kind of awaiting headlining, basically. Cal's the in-house headlining expert, so we were waiting for Cal to be able to get on to doing the headlining, so we've been picking up a few other jobs. Cal got onto that at the end of last week. He got the headlining all fitted, that's all in, and then that enables a bit of a sort of avalanche of other jobs to take place, sort of working from the top down. Obviously the glass can then go in once the headlining's in, so windscreen's now in, rear windows in, plastic rear window, glass front window. The wiper mechanism was already in. Then Scott's been working a little bit more on the interior. He's got the last bits of tidying up that were necessary prior to the seats going in. He's got the seats in, harnesses in, that's all done now. The doors are now pretty much built up. On the doors, James had already made the carbon fibre door cards. And he trial fitted those, there's no problems there, but there were various things. There's some little spacers needed behind them, because in the original doors there are dimples in the door inners for the plastic trim clips to go into that held the original vinyl and hardboard door cards. We now need to space these so that the carbon isn't pulled into those dimples, because we've riv-nutted the dimples for the screws to hold the door cards in, and we don't want the door cards to distort when the screws pull them up. So they have now got little nylon spacers on each screw to make sure that the door card stays flat when it's bolted up. Scott's also fitted the remainder of the door inners, which were kind of awaiting another job that Cal had done, which was fitting the window winder mechanisms. If anybody's worked with Chevette winder mechanisms previously, you'll be aware that they have a cable mechanism, a loose cable mechanism, which is a nightmare to fit. It's basically just a loose wire that wraps around a drum that is operated by the winder. They're very reliable once they're in, but they do tend to end up as just a big tangle of wire between being stripped from the car and waiting to go back in the car. So Cal had refitted those. That's enabled Scott to then fit the door lock mechanisms, the door check straps, and the latches and all the other parts inside the door. And then he's also fitted the door interior release handles, and then the door grab handles for shutting the doors, which you may remember from previous episodes. We had George had designed, George had drawn up some handles. We decided they were good. They'd been machined, and then they've been sent for anodizing. They're now black anodized, they're back, and they're now fitted to the doors as well. Looking at them, I think we're waiting for the fasteners, a duplicate set of fasteners for those to be black Xylan coated, and then they'll be changed for the bright zinc plated fasteners that are in there at the moment. And then also, Scott's been able to carry on with the dashboard fitment. There were a few little bits of wiring. There's not a lot of wiring in the dash, but the few little bits of wiring that needed finishing to tie into the dash, they've been done, and now the dashboard's all fitted. So things are progressing apace. I think the next step is going to be fitting the rear quarter windows, which we've been waiting for the seals for. Unfortunately, one of the rear quarter window seals that were with the car was perished a little bit in various places and wasn't good enough to reuse, which is a shame because the other side's very good. They're not an available part. They have been produced in the aftermarket on and off, but there are none currently available as far as we can determine. So we are making those up using an endless length of seal, so it won't be a moulded. So the fit in the corners is going to take a little bit of finessing. Finessing is the word. A little bit of finessing to make it fit in the corners. But Scott will be on with that next on that to get the rear windows fitting nicely. So yeah, work progressing apace on the Chevette, and we're. I'd hesitate to use the words "the end is in sight," but it is pretty much. There are a number of jobs still to do, but it is coming together quite well. And road testing isn't going to be a million miles away on that. That's starting to come together quite well.
Chevette next. We're absolutely in the latter stages with this. So a couple of days ago we had Dave Rowe. He's kind of our go-to Motec specialist. This is all running Motec electronics. and we've been waiting to do the final bits of programming because we didn't have the steering wheel. Again, that sounds like an odd thing to say, but we're running little button packs on the steering wheel that do a lot of the controls. So your indicators are on there, main beam, screen wash, your scrolls for the menus on the dash display, and hazards, they're all on the steering wheel button packs. Now, until I had the steering wheel, I obviously couldn't mount those packs, and I didn't want to make up the wiring to them until I knew their position on the wheel. Steering wheel turned up the other day, so Dave come over, made up the wiring to those button packs. That goes to a little auto sport connector on the dash, little machined sort of quarter turn connector. And with those packs in place, he's then able to do the rest of the programming. It's a CAN bus system, so again, there's only 2 or 3 wires, I think, that connect the button packs to the dash, which then connect to the PDM that controls all the electrics on the car. So yeah, everything's set up now. We've seen all the lights functioning, the rear lights, which I don't know if Jamie's got any footage of actually, but we'll show the rear lights working. We've also finished doing a bit of setup on the dash display on that, so calibrating the fuel gauge, for example, and making sure we've got all the data that we wanted to have on that dash, because you can basically scroll through on the steering wheel buttons, different pages on the dash. So from the main page where you've got all the usual things, engine temperature, oil temperature, revs, you know, all the usual things you'd go to, you can go through into sub-menus and see more detailed information. One of the ones I really like, because we're running the Motec PDM, which controls all the electrics, you can go to a page on the dash where you can see all the current that's being drawn by the individual channels. So for instance, you can see, you know, how much current the headlights are drawing or how much current the fuel pump's drawing. It's quite nice to see that information sometimes for diagnostic purposes. So yeah, absolutely in the latter stages. We've done the model for the fuel tank enclosure cover. So we're actually having a carbon fibre honeycomb panel made that covers in the top of the fuel tank enclosure. And to allow the composite company to make that, we've made a model in MDF, 12mm MDF, which we'll then send to the composite company. They'll take a mould of that, and then in that mould they'll lay up a carbon fibre honeycomb panel, which will then be a perfect fit into that aperture. So with that done, a few other bits and bobs, we are very much getting towards the time we can actually test that and make sure it's good for handover to the customer. So exciting times. Chevette. Small steps on this. We've been doing some more paint work, more black paint. It's not black enough already. We've done the cam cover, gloss black. The breather tank was awaiting paint, so that's been painted and final fitted now. And at the same time we did the wiper arms. There was a few parts with this car we had to source, because actually the owner supplied it to us already partially stripped. And some of the bits which he'd stripped off, which have subsequently disappeared, were actually bits we needed, including the bars that hold the headlining, which I've already sourced, the number plate lights and the wiper arms. Very kindly, a chap called Dave Deakin, who we know quite well, has come through on all of those occasions and had them lying around in his garage, so we've been able to get them from him. The wiper arms have now been stripped and painted gloss black, and we've mounted on these little washer spray bars that we use on the more motorsporty builds. It's basically a plastic bar with little drillings in, that's fed with screen wash at one end, and you have a pipe that comes up out of the scuttle along the wiper arm and literally sprays the screen wash all the way along the wiper blade itself, so it literally sprays all the way through the wiper's sweep. So they're attached. We were almost done on that, and then suddenly had a change of mind that there wasn't enough black on the car, so we are changing out the clear screen wash tube for black screen wash tube, so that's all black. So that's that. We're just waiting on the black screen fillet to finish the windscreen seal off there. There's like a little strip that spreads it out and secures it in properly. Scott's just been working on the bracket for the comms port, communications port for the engine ECU. So it's like a Ethernet cable connection. So that'll be just mounted up under the dash there, so you can easily plug in with a laptop and monitor all the engine data. And we're just making up a baffle plate for the brake fluid reservoir. Now these have got vented caps on, and under really heavy driving conditions, we've found with a couple of other cars, you can get a bit of fluid coming out through the vent in the cap. So we're making a baffle plate that sandwiches under the main lid of that tank, just to prevent any brake fluid loss through that cap. And yeah, other than that, it's mainly small details. George has been doing a bit on this actually. He's designed the wheel centre caps. They're Revolution wheels, 9-inch by 15-inch rear, 8-inch by 15-inch front. But the standard Revolution caps, they're really deep and a bit ugly looking, plastic things. So we're doing some really slim machined aluminium ones that will be black anodised. They'll just slot in and be almost flush with the wheel. And he's also been doing the bonnet prop components design. So we've got a carbon fibre bonnet prop that's going to be clipped to the actual underside of the bonnet. It's got a rose joint at one end. George has drawn up a little machined clevis, which is going to hold that at one end. That's the hinging end of it. Then the other end is drawn up a small nylon insert that goes into the end of the carbon tube, and then a receiver that will go on the scuttle panel, which is basically a machined aluminium cup, which will be sunk into the slam panel, and then it's got a little nylon sort of conical pad inside it that the prop rests into, so it won't chafe any paint or scratch any anodising. So those parts are just being machined this week. They'll be with us next week, and at that point we really are tying up loose ends on this. We made an MDF template for the fuel tank cover, which went over yesterday to KS Composites, who do most of our carbon fibre work. There's a link in there actually, conveniently, with the Redux M3, in that the headline really is that almost all of the exterior bodywork is carbon fibre on it. So when we get those cars here, we strip the shell completely just to the inner structure, and it's all our own design carbon fibre bodywork on it. But as I say, we'll do a more detailed video on that another time. The Chevette is very much in the latter stages. We had some of the machined bits arrive this week. So I think last week I mentioned the fact that we'd been working on the bonnet prop arrangement. It's a carbon fibre bonnet prop. George has designed a little clevis that it attaches to on the underside of the bonnet, and a little receiver for the slam panel. Andy, Concept 303, has machined those for us. They arrived this week. The aluminium parts have gone off to be anodised. As soon as they're back, they can go on. He also did the wheel centre caps. We've trial fitted those. They look spot on, so they've gone away to be anodised. Scott has been on with some bits on the interior. He's actually in there now. We made a little shield around the power steering ECU, which sits on the driver's kick panel, and it was quite easy to catch your foot on it when you were pressing the throttle. So I've made a little shield that sits around that in aluminium. We've also done a couple of carbon fibre panels. There's one that sits above the passenger footrest that infills up to the bottom of the dash, because the battery sits behind there, and where the battery cables come up and the wiring to the PDM and the ECU come out from those items wasn't quite as tidy as I would like, so we've made a little carbon fibre panel just to close in the footwell there. And then we've also made a little triangular carbon fibre panel that goes in the little gap formed between the roll cage and the front of the door shut and the bottom of the dash, and we've done that on both sides just so you can't see in and around sort of the back of the dash there. So yeah, definitely final stages. I think first week in January we'll be wrapping everything up. Scott actually at this exact moment is fitting the gear knob we had. It's a Quaife sequential box. They come with a white nylon gear knob, which is kind of a Quaife trademark, but we wanted, with everything being black, we wanted it to be black. So we've machined a black nylon gear knob to replace that. Scott's just been fitting that and the Alcantara gear gaiter that we've done. So it's all coming together. As I was saying, January should be ticking off the last jobs and road testing. So definitely we'll get some in-car footage. I know everybody sort of misses the fact that we don't get an awful lot of driving footage, because usually when we get to the end of a project it's handed over fairly quickly to the customer, but I will endeavour to get some driving footage of this one. Chevette. So Scott has been working on this mainly, and what has he been up to? So we did the air filter backplate. We've got the air filter on there for the first time. I've been working on installing the bonnet prop. I think we showed previously that George had designed various parts for that. So there's a little machine billet clevis that holds that to the underside of the bonnet. The prop itself is carbon fibre on a little rose joint at the top there, and then it folds up and clips into a little clip at the bottom of the bonnet. And then there's a little receiver which we've sunk into the slam panel, which is a machined anodised sort of ring with a nylon machined insert in it that just sits into nylon, so that the bit that the prop constantly goes into and wears on doesn't have a finish that will wear away. Obviously, if we did that in anodised aluminium, after a while the anodising would wear off. So any bit where there's something that touches and moves on it's been done in a material where the surface finish can't wear off. George has just been working on the final revisions to the headlight bezels. We did the sort of basic groundwork for the design of those quite a while ago. But the fit wasn't quite there, and there were a few elements of the design that we thought we could improve on slightly. So we've been reworking those and also shelling a lot of weight out of the design because they're going to be a machined aluminium part. We're trying to shell the whole back out so that it's a fairly thin wall component and doesn't weigh a ridiculous amount. But I think those drawings will be finished today, and we can get those machined, which is the finishing touch really on the front. The centre caps I've just sent away. We had those machined, and they were anodised just before Christmas, and I've just sent those away to be laser engraved, along with the little caps that will go over the bits that stand out like a sore thumb in the engine bay, the orange caps in there, and there's one inside as well. So we've got little billet sleeves that have been black anodised that go over those, and then they're going away to being laser engraved with the logo. So that'll have a screen wash logo on it, oil logo, the one inside's got the brake fluid logo. And then the wheel centre caps, I'll tell you what, I won't tell you what the logo is going on those. I'll do a reveal on that when they come back. I fitted the number plate light, insignificant thing, but that's another of the parts that was removed by the owner before the car came here. So I managed to source that from Dave Deakin again, who seems to be the local hoarder of Chevette parts. So he came up trumps on that, and I've just cleaned that up and installed that. Scott's been just working on the brake pedal switch and bracket. So I think before Christmas he made the bracket, which sits next to the pedal arm and holds a little mica switch, which is what switches the brake lights on when you press the pedal. He's just finished installing that and wiring that up today. We also, just before Christmas, did the gear stick shortening. So you'll probably notice previously had a ridiculously long gear stick in it, which is, it's good to have, a decent length gear stick on these, brings it closer to the steering wheel, so it's not as much of a reach when you transition between wheel and gear stick, and obviously gives you more leverage on the sequential box, which needs a fairly good shove to get through the gears, but it was a bit excessively long. So when we got the black knob back for that, because it had the trademark white nylon Quaife gear knob on it, and as with everything else on the car, we wanted it to be black. So Andy, Concept 303, our small part machinist, go-to man, did us a little replica of a Quaife knob but in black Delrin. So we shortened the stick, put that black knob on, and the Alcantara gear gaiter, and that's finished that off nicely. So yeah, we're really into final tweaks on this now. Once we've got those components I've just talked about back, the headlight bezels on, the centre caps on, we're going to be into final spanner check, final alignment and road testing. Something I forgot to mention as well, I picked it up literally on the last day, I think the 23rd, was the carbon panel in the boot. So I think we previously showed the pattern being made for that, which we made in MDF. When we did the metalwork, we left a half-inch deep flanged recess around that enclosure that the fuel tank's in. Then we made a half-inch thick MDF template of that infill panel with the round cutout for where the fuel fill is. And then KS Composites, our go-to carbon fibre guys, have made us up a carbon fibre honeycomb panel, which sits in there. And I specifically wanted it to be, have thickness and be a honeycomb panel, so it's actually got some strength to it, because when you actually lead in there, you're going to put your weight on that. I didn't want it to be just a single skin carbon fibre panel that flaps around and flexes. You want to be able to put your weight on it, so that's why that's there. So yeah, that's about it on that for the moment. And then Chevette. So lots of little details really, and finishing off jobs. We've just got back some of the parts I mentioned last week that had gone away for anodising. So the little caps that go on the brake fluid reservoir and the screen wash reservoir, little machine black anodised caps that have been now laser etched with the logos we wanted on them. And then the wheel centre caps, I mentioned last week that they were being lasered with a logo. I didn't say what. It's probably my weird sense of humour that thinks this is cool, but we've done essentially the Ford RS logo, only with RP, but obviously in a slightly tongue-in-cheek fashion in that it's actually a Vauxhall. So it's perhaps only me that gets that, the comedy in that. But nonetheless, it's a really cool design. Really, really happy with how they look, actually. So they're going to be a really nice finishing touch on the outside of the car. The carbon honeycomb panel that finishes off the fuel tank aperture. We've been doing the brackets that hold that down, so it's held down with pit pins, which are basically like a machined pin that then has a little sprung bearings in the bottom of it, which are held in by another pin that runs down inside it concentrically. And when you press that pin, it pushes down and allows those balls to sort of slot into the pin, if that makes any sense at all, so it can slide out. But as soon as you push those ball bearings past a hole in a panel, they then latch into the back, and without the release button being pressed, it's completely locked in place. So we're running 4 of those pit pins down into brackets which Scott's fabricated that hold that whole panel in, and they attach to some parts of the shell that we fabricated when we were at the metalwork stage. We put in provision for those mounts. We've been tying up a few ends wiring wise as well. Obviously we had the whole wiring loom done by Bremax, but there are still little sub looms here and there where they've done a connection to feed power to, for instance in this case, the power steering ECU, which is just a DTM connector with an ignition switch live and an earth. So we've been putting the little controller in for that, putting the other half of that wiring in, running the main power feed over for the power steering, electric power steering system. It's running a Corsa B electric power steering setup on it. I've done the wiring for the fire extinguisher because that's a completely separate system to the main wiring loom. It's self-contained, it's got a battery pack in the controller for it. For obvious reasons really, if the entire wiring fails on the car, it's still got its own self-contained extinguisher system. So I've got that wired in. That's got test functionality on it, so you can press the buttons and see an LED light on the control box to make sure that all the circuits are working as they should, and it also senses whether there's a break in the continuity through the valve itself, so you can, in theory, test that it should definitely work when you actually need it to without setting it off. Funny story on that one. Another time, it was on the other Chevette actually, we had the same extinguisher system. It's a Lifeline 0360 system, and we wanted to change the valve where the chemical comes out of the extinguisher itself from, I think it was from a T-piece that it comes with, to a single elbow. And Adam took the elbow out, and for whatever reason it went off, and I think it was like his first week or something, so he had to come to me, I think it was like literally his first week of work here, and say, I've just set the extinguisher off in the Chevette. Thankfully the stuff that it uses is actually not, you'd think there'd be masses of like foam or something everywhere, but it's almost like a clear liquidy chemical, and it just kind of evaporates off and it doesn't leave a lot of residue. So that was the plus side of it. The downside is it was quite an expensive refill. So that's that. What else have we done with the... had a total mental block. I'm going to look at my list. Window winders. That was probably one of the big things. We used a custom cage in this car, so it was an off-the-shelf cage. And have to hold our hands up in total admission on this one that we never checked that there was clearance between the window winders and the cage. And of course most motorsport cars use fixed plastic windows. Because this is primarily a road car, still wanted nice easy roll down windows on it. But the spindle for the winder is about probably, I don't know, 3 inches away from the cage tube that comes down the front. So you couldn't actually wind the windows without the handle hitting the tube. So we racked our brains a bit on that and decided to come up with these just round, kind of knurled wheels that go on there, which are being machined at the moment. So you can basically get your hand around it and wind the window reasonably easily. It's not quite as easy as original, but reasonably easily, without bashing your hand into the cage all the time. So we have a moment of panic there, but we have a solution. And I think the other thing was the carbon panel that we made previously, which fills the gap between the passenger's footrest and the underside of the dash. We've just been cutting out a couple of holes in that to mount a battery charger port. So because the battery's hidden behind that panel, we put a CTEC panel mount connector in there, so you can connect a charger into that. And also the communications port for the engine ECU, so there's just an Ethernet connection port that also mounts in that panel, so you can just plug the engine ECU in nice and easily. And that's about where we're at on that.